closing thoughts. So, first card, Druid. Fandral Staghelm. I will get my pronunciation practice in today. Forgive me if I mispronounce one. Your choose one cards have both effects combined. Okay, so first of all, the creature itself is a 4 mana 3/5, which is a very good creature. You're taking 1 damage off of the ideal statted creature. A lot of creatures at 4 mana have 3/5 stats, and the 3/5 in the rest of the game sense, in terms of how it trades with other creatures, is a very balanced stat line that it does good amounts of damage. Specifically, it loses to 5/5s, but that's kind of its one weakness. The actual effect on the card is absolutely insane. In exchange for taunt, essentially, this is the same as a Senjin, which would have taunt. All your Druid choose one cards have both effects, which is doubling their effectiveness in some cases. There are cards like Ancient of Lore, which we've seen will only draw 1 card now, but Ancient of Lore itself, getting both effects, is not doubling the power of the card, because a lot of the power of the card comes from the body. But for something like Starfall, you are just getting both effects, and that is the entire portion of the card. Or Raven Idol. Yeah, Raven Idol seems pretty good. It's really easy to combine with this because it's 1 mana. You get a minion and a spell. I assume you get to choose the discovery on both as well, so you get a lot of choice there. This creature seems insane. I think you're definitely going to play it. And so many of the Druid cards have the choose one that you would always have some of those in your deck anyways. Pretty cool, pretty cool. It's reminds me like of a Bran, but a bigger Bran. It's a 4 mana Bran for Druids only. Next card, Forbidden Ancient. Battlecry, spend all of your mana, gain +1/+1 for each mana spent. So this is in the line of the Forbidden cards that we've seen, where they're consuming all your mana. Yeah, it's pretty good actually. Druid is one of the classes where floating mana feels really poor, where if you have extra mana, you want to be able to use it each turn, because the Druid class mechanics are mostly interacting with giving you early mana, things like Wild Growth and Innervate. So this allows you to fit your curve more easily, and it gives you an option. I like this one a lot. Of the Forbidden cards we've seen, I'd say this is probably one of the ones I prefer to actually use. If you had 5 mana and you played this, you would get a 5/5 because it costs 1, and then you have +4. Which is pretty good. That's about what you want it for. Addled Grizzly, 3 mana 2/2. After you summon a minion, give it +1/+1. Summon a minion. So I believe that involves living roots as well, which makes it pretty good. The tokens from Violet Teacher. It's possible I'm incorrect about this, so I won't analyze this card too much. It seems like a cool idea. If it's actually giving you synergy off of those minions that are summoned and not ones that are just played from your hand, I think it has some really cool synergy with token Druid styles, and also with like the Wisp cards that summon a lot of Wisps. Next up, Feral Rage. I like this one a lot. Give your hero +4 attack or gain 8 armor, so it's like a Shadow Bolt. Of course you have to take the face damage, but it could go to the opponent hero's face, so it lets you use a finisher as well. And gain 8 armor is very useful. It's actually more useful to gain armor than it is to gain health. So it's like a healing touch, but it's better than a healing touch, and you could make it do 4 damage instead. Great card. If you combined it with Fandral, then you would get +4 attack and 8 armor. I like these types of situational cards a lot. The choose one for the Druid feels very rewarding for the player, where you get that option. So, cool card. It's also a common, so imagine you see this a lot in Arena, although I'm not sure how good it would be for Arena. On to the Hunter cards. Infested Wolf, 4 mana 3/3. Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 spiders. I like this card a lot. Hunter doesn't have a very consistent 4-drop. They have Houndmaster, which is a lot of power on turn 4, but it requires them to already have board control. This creature is something you can play regardless of your board state, and will always be good. And it gives Death Rattle synergy to Hunters, which we've seen a lot of Death Rattle cards. Infested Wolf seems like a very solid 4-drop, competitive with anything else at the 4 mana slot, plus it's a beast. Next up, Carrion Grub, 3 mana 2/5. I mean, the obvious synergy for this is with Houndmaster. If you play this, then you Houndmaster next turn. You're getting a 4/7, and you're getting the 4/3 body, which is a lot of stats on curve. Otherwise, though, this creature on its own is not aggressive at all. It's a defensive creature. And we already have 2/5s at 3 mana. The Druid of the Flame is a 2/5 at 3 mana, but it's not played very often. Most of the time, you'd rather have a bit extra damage than a bit extra health. Seems like Houndmaster synergy. Probably a good arena pick. I think this is a good arena card, and it is a common. Fiery Bat, 1 mana, 2/1, Death Rattle, deal damage to a random enemy. This is a very strong card. It's, yeah, definitely very good. It's a beast. It is a 2/1, and it gives you a bonus. Super solid, almost in any hunter deck. The early game, deal 1 random damage could be huge, where you completely kill an extra creature with it. And the fact that it's a beast on top of that just gives you even more synergy, so really good card. The one thing I will say about this card is when you're getting random beasts, you probably don't want this. This kind of makes the random beasts have more low value cards. Generally when you get random beasts, you want something around 3 to 6 mana, so a 1 mana card's a bit weaker. But you'll just play this in your actual deck, so it's a much bigger consideration. 1 mana On the Hunt, deal 1 damage, summon a 1/1 Mastiff. It's a cool card. I like this card, especially from the perspective of hunter combo decks. It's another 1 mana card, so for something like Lock and Load, you could use this really well. You guys might know I love Lock and Load decks, so it gives me a bit of optimism for that. I don't believe the Mastiff has charge. If the Mastiff has charge, then it's really, really good, but I think it's just a 1/1 beast, which makes it alright. It does scale really well with spell power as well, because if you give it spell power, it's like an arcane shot plus the summon. Onto the Mage cards. I really like this one. I saw this one. Death Rattle, deal 8 damage to all minions. There's missing the S on the card. Interesting. To all minion. 8 mana, 8/6. So the first thing with this card is it is a very decent body. It's not the best body ever, but an 8/6 is pretty strong. It's going to trade up on most things. And it's an investment, so even if you play this on an empty board, it's still okay if they kill it and you don't get much benefit from the Death Rattle. But if you play this on a contested board, it's really likely that you're going to be able to get some value out of it and set up for a nice turn on your next turn. I'm sure there are some specific synergies we can do with this with Death Rattle as well, given all the copy Death Rattle effects, copy creatures there are that have been revealed this expansion. So yeah, pretty cool card. I like this one. I'll definitely try using it. I don't think it's for every mage deck by any means, but it has its own purpose in certain types of control mage decks, which could be fun. Next up, Cult Sorcerer, 2 mana 3/2, so right away the body is pretty good. Spell damage +1. After you cast a spell, give your Cthulhu +1/+1 wherever it is. Oh my, this card is really good. First of all, having spell damage on a 3/2 is already very strong. You could just make it a 3/2 with +1 spell damage, and I think there are decks that would definitely use this. One of the things to think about is that this expansion has released a lot of large creatures, but we've mostly seen nerfs to early game creatures or reductions of how strong early game board presence is, so spells are looking even more appealing than before, and giving something like this, which has spell synergy, is really cool for such an early turn. And then beyond that, it also buffs your Cthulhu every time you cast a spell, so if you're playing Cthulhu, which I don't even think you need to be, it's just a good card, you're getting a bonus as well. 2 mana Shatter, destroy a frozen minion. What? Yeah, that's pretty strong. Definitely gives a lot of options to control mage styles. There are a huge amount of freeze effects. You have Water Elemental, which is really good for drop already, and if your Water Elemental just happened to damage something and it was frozen, you could blow it up for 2 mana. Ice Lance, Frostbolt, Frost Nova, Cone of Cold, Blizzard. Am I forgetting something? You can also get any of these spells out of the random discovery mage mechanics like Kabbalah's Tomb, Conjurer, and this you could also get out of those, giving you great synergy. Definitely a cool card. I like this card a lot. I hope to see some maybe like tempo freeze hybrids where we're freezing creatures while we invest in early game and shatter for low mana costs. Pretty fun. Okay, next up, Paladin. 3 mana 3/2. Battlecry, give +1/+1 to your minions with Divine Shield. Yeah, 3/2 weapon is actually pretty good for Paladin. Paladins traditionally have no way to deal 3 damage. They've had Coghammer, which is actually being removed, deals 2 damage. They've had Seal of Light, which deals 2 damage, restores 4 health to your hero. So even though this is worse than a War Axe in terms of the base weapon being a 3/2, it's actually really good for Paladin to give them that option to deal 3 damage. Similar to like a Power Mace in a lot of ways, where Shaman didn't have access to a 3 damage weapon, but Shaman did have access to 3 damage spells, so this is even better for Paladin. On the other side, it gives +1/+1/+1 to your minions with Divine Shield. I think if you have 1 minion with Divine Shield, that's fine. You don't need more than that. It does have the potential to get more, but you're not looking for some glorious play. You're playing this because it's a 3/2 weapon, and that's pretty good. Paladin, 1 mana Selfless Hero. Death Rattle, give a friendly minion Divine Shield. This is a really good card. The Paladins have gotten a lot of Divine Shield synergy. I mean, Rallying Blade, but there's also quite a few more. And Divine Shield obviously works well with the stat buffs the Paladins like to give with some of their cards. It's a 1 mana fighting card. It's good for an aggro deck. It's good for a control deck. You can pretty much just play it on turn 1, and it's going to give you Divine Shield on turn 2. So that almost seems a little too strong in some ways. If you're going to play this on turn 1, your opponent could say coin hero power to kill it and waste its value, but it really forces a reaction early, and it's still pretty good in the late game. You'll definitely see this card played. 2 mana, a Light in the Darkness. Discover a minion, give it +1/+1. Discover a minion. So I've played a lot of Raven Idol. Discover a minion is not actually that good. I mean, you get really different outcomes, and often you don't get the thing you're looking for. It does give it +1/+1, which has some cool synergy, but you're way overpaying your mana for it. +1/+1 is probably worth 1 mana. So don't think this card's too amazing. It does give Paladins a bit of flex options, which they're kind of lacking on their spells, so I think that's the purpose of it. It is also a common card, and I imagine in Arena this is pretty good. Discovering in Arena is much better for you because your opponent's not going to have as many options. And the last Paladin card, Divine Strength. 1 mana, give a minion +1/+2. Right there. I mean, so this effect is not even worth 1 mana. It's slightly better than that. This is really good. +2 health means you can probably trade. The one thing this doesn't do is synergize that much with Divine Shields, because giving health with Divine Shield is not that useful. But it's another early game card, and Divine Favor is still a very present threat, so I think this is going to be worthwhile to play. Moving on to Priest. Priest got some pretty cool ones. They did get mostly expensive cards, and the Priest early game is looking a little rough, so that's mostly what I'm concerned about. I think right now Priest is going to struggle to beat Shamans in the early game and on curve, so these cards are often looking appealing, but I'm scared for Priest's actual position in like doing battle and keeping a board. We'll analyze them anyways though. 5 mana Twilight Dark Mender. Battlecry, if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, restore 10 health to your hero. Okay, so on the stats, this card is good. 6/5 for 5 mana is very solid. You could just play it without getting the restore 10 health. And on the other side, a Cthulhu Priest is definitely the defensive player, so restoring 10 health to your hero is really good. Getting health restore as a priest is already kind of hard. They have Holy Fire and Flash Heal, but 10 health is a lot, so you would certainly play this in any Cthulhu Priest deck. For such an early mana cost too, you consider a Shield Maiden right now was 6 mana, gain 5 health, and that was almost considered a mandatory inclusion. This is 5 mana and a better body, and it gains twice as much health. Of course, armor is not quite the same, but yeah, good card. Next up, 5 mana Power Word Tentacles. I can't believe they actually chose that name for it. I thought that was a troll card. Give a minion +2/+6. Yeah, this is fine. The stats on that is very high. It's a replacement for Velen's Chosen, but I think they realized Velen's Chosen on some early game creatures was just unstoppable without a silence. This takes place late enough in the game, your opponent should have the ability to remove a big creature. But it's worth the stat weight. +6 health is very good. And it even gives you damage too. You could play this. It's just a heavy card. A lot of the time around turn 5, Priest is considering clearing the board. Next up, 5 mana Darkshire Alchemist. Battlecry restore 5 health to your hero. So 4/5. No, you're probably not going to play this card. There's actually a card very similar to this right now. Is the Dark Scale Healer, I believe. Nobody plays it. It's a 5 mana 4/5, and it restores 2 health to everything, which is actually, you know, I would argue better than this. You're able to heal your creatures, you're healing your hero as well. But a 4/5 for 5 mana has just never really been competitive. So I don't think this will see play very often. 4 mana 3/6 is probably one of the best ones that Priest saw today. Whenever a character is healed, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. It's a 3/6 for 4 mana. It's good body and it's high health, and that's what Priests need out of a creature, is a high health creature that's hard to remove. Priests didn't really have access to a 3/6 before. The only one they could play was Twilight Guardian, the dragon. So this gives kind of a better option to non-dragon priests. I like this one. It's a good card. Moving on to Rogue. Blade of Cthulhu. Battlecry, destroy a minion, add its health and attack to Cthulhu. This is a very expensive card. 9 mana 4/4. So essentially you're paying for the Assassinate, which is 5 mana. Then you're getting a 4/4 for 4 mana, which is not very competitive. It does give the attack and health to Cthulhu, but at 9 mana I feel like it's just too slow. You're not even playing Assassinate right now, so something would have to drastically change to make this see more play. Journey Below, 1 mana, discover a Death Rattle card. Okay, this is good. Just to imagine, like, compared to the Paladin, discover a minion. Discover a Death Rattle card is way better. You are consistently getting something, so you know, like, roughly what your options are when you're playing this. It's only 1 mana, and then rogues have really good combo synergy. So anything for 1 mana as a rogue is really appealing because it's giving your other cards their power. I think this card is awesome no matter what rogue deck you're playing. Works well with an Auctioneer as well. Pretty cool. It's like a spell that turns into... Oh, actually it's a Death Rattle card. Are there any weapons for rogue that have Death Rattle? It feels like there might be something other than a minion you could get out of this that I'm not thinking of right now. Maybe something for you guys to comment on the video. Next up, 4 mana 4/4 South Sea Squid Face. Death Rattle, give your weapon +2 attack. Yeah, it's hard to say. We haven't really seen anything drastic for weapons from Rogue, and they did get Blade Flurry nerfed pretty hard. 4 mana 4/4. Rogues already have a lot of really competitive creatures at 4 mana. The Tomb Pillager, Violet Teacher, both solid. I don't think this is going to see too much play unless we get some change to weapons. Shadow Strike, 3 mana, deal 5 damage to an undamaged character. So it's 1 more damage to a Shadow Bolt, which is the 3 mana, deal 4 damage. This can hit the hero, interestingly. If the hero is undamaged, it can hit the hero because it's to a character. This could also hit your own minions if for some reason you wanted to do that. But probably just going to use this, deal 5 damage to something. I think it's okay. It's a slower card than Rogue generally uses for their removal, but it is a slight upgrade on just a normal 3 mana removal that other classes have access to, so it could be worthwhile. And last, 1 mana 1/2 Bladed Cultist. Combo gain +1/+1. So it turns into a 2/3 if you have combo. I mean, I don't think that's very good. The problem is you want to play this on turn 1, and then obviously you don't have combo. If you played Coin, Bladed Cultist, that'd be pretty strong, but there's no way you're going to take it for that. Later in the game, getting a 2/3 is not that useful to a rogue. There has to be like a specific deck this is used for. Maybe some type of really aggressive 1 mana rogue deck. Shamans. Alright, are we all prepared to say hail to our Shaman overlords? Almost regardless of what they got today, Shaman were already looking in one of the strongest positions based on the previous card releases. But let's just take a glance at what they got today as well, so we can make sure that we're bowing down appropriately to our mid-range Shaman overlords. 2 mana 3/2 Eternal Sentinel. Unlock your overloaded mana crystals. I mean, this card is amazing. Lavish Shock was being phased out, and I guess they felt that no matter what, Shamans need a way to unlock their mana crystals. It is a 3/2, so you could just play this even without anything overloaded, because it's a good creature for that mana cost. and it has the advantage of unlocking your mana crystals when you need it. Really good creature for anything playing Overload. Certainly a strong Shaman card. Evolve. Transform your minion into a random minion that costs 1 more. They like giving Shamans the ability to upgrade their minions with Recombobulator effects. I think this card is definitely worth it. One of the main advantages when you think of transforming your minion into a random minion, well, there's 2 actually. First, if the minion on the board had already attacked something, then when it's been wounded, right? So when you turn it into another minion, it's a new minion, and it's kind of like you gained value there. So that's a really useful property. Beyond that, you can get cards that you wouldn't normally be able to play in your deck. Random minions mean you can get class cards, so you can get class cards from other classes, and that can just be straight up broken if you get something really cool. So yeah, good card. Definitely could consider playing this. 4 mana 7/7 Overload 2. Does overload you. You could just drop your Eternal Sentinel next turn. 7/7 is very strong for 4 mana. That is the largest 4 mana creature. The only thing comparable to that is the Eerie Statue, which cannot attack. So, seems pretty good. Yeah, I think you could definitely play this. You could play this in some type of deck that was originally using Fel Reavers, and this is kind of a replacement for Fel Reaver, where it's something really threatening early in the game, and it actually comes a turn earlier. Next card rather, 2 mana Stormcrack. Deal 4 damage to a minion. It's like Crackle, but more consistent. And I guess that's good, but it obviously can't go face, so that's a pretty big decrease. This is worse than Crackle in a lot of ways, however, this is still a good card. This is like guaranteed that it's worse than Crackle, but it is a good card because with the removal of Crackle, Shamans don't have anything in that mana slot to overload or to clear the board. This gives you an option that's not just doing 3 damage, and it's something to play after Tunnel Trog to clean up. So yeah, you could definitely play this card. 1 mana Primal Fusion. Give a minion +1/+1 for each of your totems. Alright, this is probably the least impressive of the Shaman cards we've seen. You have to have a lot of totems on the board, so you're probably already in a good position anyways. You have to wait to play this for a long time. It is 1 mana, so you could do like some Auctioneer synergy or something kind of cool, but I don't think this one's going to get played too often. The other totem cards are just much stronger. So overall, Shaman got 4 pretty good cards today, along with what was already looking one of the strongest decks. I think Shaman is going to be played a lot. On the plus side, the cards that they're releasing are kind of cool. On the downside, I feel like a lot of it is play on curve cards. Shaman has really effective cards for almost every mana slot now, and you could just get the Dream Draw and play out your hand similar to kind of the way a Secret Paladin plays, and it feels like it could be unstoppable. Things like Evolve and Master of Evolution. Gonna be interesting to see if we can stop them. Doomhammer is still around. It's not as if they lost their burst damage either. Next up is Warlock. 2 mana Darkshire Librarian. Battlecry, discover a random card. Death Rattle, draw a card. Oh, discard a random card. Whew, I thought it was drawing you 2 cards for a second there. Discard a random card, Death Rattle, draw a card. Well, it works with the discard style decks. No, I'm not a big fan of this. Throwing away a card in your hand is not worth as much as drawing a card from your deck. So even if it was Battlecry, discard a card, and draw a card, I don't think it was that good. And it's a Death Rattle to draw a card, so you even have to wait for the return investment. The only way this is going to work is if you're playing the discard Warlock with Lycanda Jaraxxus. Forbidden Ritual. Spend all your mana, summon that many 1/1 tentacles. Kind of like Implosion, where you can fill the board up, and it's under control of the Warlock. I like this card. Its stat weight is competitive for each mana value. You probably end up using it early, around turn 3 or 4, and then it's just something you can buff up with your other cards. It's a fun zoo card where it's not as cheesy feeling as Implosion was, where you're dealing damage and summoning things. You're just summoning things, but Warlock benefits so much from that. I think they'll play this anyways. 5 mana Usher of Souls. 5/6. Whenever a friendly minion dies, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. So it's a pit fighter. which is arguably the best statted 5-mana creature. On the other side, though, we have seen a lot of 6/5s released for 5 mana, so then it's not perfectly the highest stat creature, but yeah, I mean, you could play this. It's not an amazing Cthulhu card, though. Whenever your minions die, like, you need to have something kind of specific going on, and then a Cthulhu Warlock is not clear that it's going to be one of the better Cthulhu decks at the moment. Next up, 3 mana, 1/5, Darkshire Councilman. After you summon a minion, gain +1 attack. So that's summon a minion, so that means when you use Forbidden Ritual, it would give you the plus attack on this. It has 5 health, which is the highest health you can have on a 3-mana creature. But when you initially play it, it's really weak, so you better be defending it properly. I don't think you would want to play this later in the game. You'd want to play this on curve and just have it not take damage. And then next turn you play Summon some Tentacles. Warrior. 7 mana, 6/5. Malkorok. Battlecry, equip a random weapon. Probably somebody knows the math on random weapons better than I do. Typically random weapons are not that great. You get maybe 3 2s or 4 2s. You can't get the Ashbringer, or that would bring up random weapons a lot. I think you can still play this as a warrior. It's like a straight up value card where you're getting a body plus a weapon. But don't get your hopes up that you're going to get anything too crazy. Most weapons are pretty average. You could get Tentacles for Arms off of it, which would be insane value. If you weren't playing Tentacles for Arms, you could just hope Malkorok gave that to you. I don't think it's amazing. It's playable, but not amazing. Blood Sail Cultist. Battlecry, if you control a pirate, give your weapon +1/+1. I mean, this card seems like it could be okay, but I wish this card was a pirate too. I don't understand why it was not a pirate. These cards that require pirate synergy but are not pirates are really bad, because most pirates do seem to get a bonus from other pirates. So it's just like a filler card, and it's not even that amazing, giving your weapon +1/+1. It is reasonably statted, but I really wish this was just a pirate too. 1 mana, Blood to Ichor. Deal 1 damage to a minion. If it survives, summon a 2/2 slime. Well, that's pretty good. Getting a 2/2 for 1 mana is really solid. You could use it to deal 1 damage in a pinch if you really needed to kill something. And dealing 1 damage for 1 mana is not good, but it's acceptable in a worst case. And obviously with something like Acolyte of Pain or Patron, you're getting deal 1 damage, which is useful to you, plus you get a 2/2. Seems good. I think you could definitely play this card. 4 mana, 2/6. Bloodhoof Brave. Taunt, Enrage, +3 attack. So if it just took 1 damage, it would be a 5/5 with Taunt for 4 mana, which is really good, but it's honestly not that good. I think the only reason you would use this is if you're playing a very Taunt-centric deck. Something with like Bolster could do well with this. Bolster would be very strong, would turn it into a 4/8. It would then be a 7 attack creature when you hit it with something. On its own, I don't think it's very good. 2 damage for 4 mana doesn't trade on anything well, and it needs to take a hit before it's going to be strong enough to actually do damage. That completes our look at the class cards. Now let's start on the neutral cards. Some of these are pretty good. We saw a lot of legendaries. Twin Emperor. Isn't it? Oh, Twin Emperor. That's definitely a T, right? But Twin Emperor Veclor. Taunt, Battlecry, if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attacks on another Emperor. Okay, so essentially, we're going to assume we always have 10 attack on our Cthulhu by turn 7, because otherwise, if we don't, there's no reason to play this card, and then it's a terrible card. If you have 10 attacks, summon another. So you get 2 4/6s with Taunt for 7 mana. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's 2 Druids of the Claw for 7 mana. 2 Druids of the Claw would typically be 10 mana. I think you could certainly play this. It's also a neutral card, and some classes are getting a lot more Cthulhu synergy than others, it seems, or a lot more effective stuff. So certain classes, like Druid Cthulhu decks, I think would love this. Playing this early as a Druid with Innervates and Wild Growths would be really strong. And then it's also a taunt, so you're defending yourself in the way a Cthulhu deck wants to. Seems good. You could definitely play it. 2 mana, Nat the Darkfisher. At the start of your opponent's turn, they have a 50% chance to draw an extra card. 2 mana, 2/4. Okay, so the 2/4 is a very strong body for 2 mana. There's nothing right now that's a 2/4. So this is kind of a Millhouse Mana Storm in a way, where Millhouse Mana Storm is a 4/4 for 2 mana, which is the strongest 2 mana creature. This is like that, where it's much stronger than you should be able to play a creature for at that mana cost, but then it has a downside where your opponent might draw a card. I think you could play this, and in a mill deck it actually would be an advantage. Seems cool. I don't mean it's not going to be played in every deck by any means, but it has the potential to actually be played, which is better than a lot of legendaries we've seen in the past. Crazed Worshipper, 5 mana, 3/6. Whenever this minion takes damage, give your Cthulhu +1/+1, wherever it is. So 3/6 for 5 mana is not very good. This is a Fen Creeper. Unless something really changes, I don't think 3/6s for 5 mana are going to be that competitive. Because if you play a 5/5, which is a good 5 mana creature, or a 5/6, or a 6/5, I mean, there are even 6/5s around, which we've seen today. The Priest card, for example, Twilight Darkmender, would just kill this, and the Twilight Darkmender survives with 2 health, so it's pretty weak. And then it does have some bonus. Whenever this minion takes damage, give your Cthulhu +1/+1. That's giving you the Cthulhu bonus. It might be that some decks really need this, and like I'm not sure how the Cthulhu decks are quite going to work out yet for all the classes, but I think certainly not every class is going to want to use this. Next up, Dark Speaker, 5 mana, 3/6. Battlecry swap stats with a friendly minion. So you're turning one of your minions into a 3/6. Yes, this is okay. Compared to the 3/6 for 5 mana, this is giving something which you want to survive better stats. And it's also not like this is dying on its own, because it has to survive whatever you gave stats to have originally had stats. It's hard for me to imagine like what this is going to be used on, but it definitely has that potential where there are things you could play that you want to have more stats on. So, could work out. 4 mana, 3/3, Cyclopean Horror. Taunt, Battlecry gain +1 for each enemy minion. Okay, so you want there to be 3 minions on the board. If there are 3 minions... No, if there are 2 minions, it's acceptable. That's a Senjin. So, you just need 2 minions on the board, which isn't that bad. If there are 3, then it's pretty good. If there are 4, then it's getting to absurd amounts of value. I think it's really specific though. Most of the time with 4 mana creatures, you just want to have like traded in the early game. You like trade your 2 mana spell for their 2 mana creature, then you like coin a 4-drop, and they probably haven't flooded the board that much. So I don't think this will see too much play. 8 mana Doomcaller. 7/9. Battlecry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2. If it's dead, shuffle it into your deck. Yeah, that's really good. And you could play 2 of these if you wanted. So what this does is it gives you another Cthulhu, and your Cthulhu does not lose its stats when it dies. Plus, this also gives it +2/+2. I don't think you would play this on turn 8. You're playing this in like some type of really heavy control deck as you get later in the game and you've used a Cthulhu and it didn't kill them. You could play another. I don't really think you would ever play 2 of these, but if the game was slow enough, you could. And it just gives Cthulhu decks the ability to, like, no matter what, win a control match if you're playing this. It will certainly slow your deck down because it's a dead card in your hand until after turn 10 when you've actually played Cthulhu. But it does give you that option to just have almost infinite value, so you guarantee you win against slower classes. Next up, Corrupted Seer, 6 mana, 2/4. Deal 2 damage to all non-Murloc minions. What? I don't know what to say about that one. It's obviously Murloc synergy. A 2/4 is a 3 mana body. So, okay, so what this is this is Demon Wrath combined with a 2/4. And it doesn't hurt Murlocs instead of demons. Demon Wrath is 3 mana, deal 2 damage to all non-demon minions. So it's like technically mana okay. It's pretty weird though. I don't know about this card. I'll leave that up to you guys to decide if you like it or not. 4 mana, 1/4, Midnight Drake. Gain +1 attack for each other card in your hand. +1 attack? This is pretty bad. 4 health is just really weak. it requires other cards in your hand, so it has like a requirement to even be good. But say you had 4 other cards, which I think is pretty consistent, or even if you had like more than that, it's still going to end up as a salty dog or evil heckler. It just is really easy to remove at 4 health, so I don't think this is worth it. It does give you dragon synergy, and I guess with Bran you could get like 14 attack pretty easily. 4 mana Blackwater Pirate. 2/5, your weapons cost 2 less. What weapons do we want this for? We have to get to turn 4 to be able to use it. Weapons that only cost 2 on their own would be good, but there's not a lot of those. I don't really like this card. Just based on the stat value, 2 damage at 4 mana is like where I consider it unplayable. 2 damage for 4 mana never really sees any use. The only card I can think of that makes it through is Defender of Argus, and that's because it's giving its stats to something else. Things like the Stormwind Knight, the Wii Spellstopper, never got to see play because it just doesn't trade on anything. It is a pirate, I guess, so get some pirate buffs. Next up, Silithid Swarmer. Can only attack if your hero attacked this turn. 3 mana, 3/5. So it's a Blackwing Technician. Requires you to have had a weapon or be a druid. It's alright. You could give it taunt. You could silence its effect. So there are ways to get around needing to attack, and having to attack is not the hardest thing ever. It's a pretty good rogue card, actually. This rogue will always have a dagger on turn 2. And then you play Silithid Swarmer on 3, it's really hard to remove. On turn 4, you hit something and attack with this. Not for every class, certainly, but it does have some ability to be played. Okay, this one's really scary. 3 mana, Disciple of Cthulhu. Battlecry, deal 2 damage, give your Cthulhu +2/+2 wherever it is. Alright, this is a really scary card to me. I think this is super strong. It's like SI Agent also deals 2 damage. And it's a 3/3, so it's not game-breakingly strong. But SI Agent needs combo, and it's also for a specific class. This can be used by any class. Dealing 2 damage, it's very similar to the Argent Horse Rider, which is the 2/1 for 3 mana with Charge and Divine Shield. It deals 2 damage, then you're left with a 2/1. But this ignores taunts, this can be doubled by Bran, and it also gives you Cthulhu synergy. So immediately it's better than Argent Horse Rider because it ignores taunts. Argent Horse Rider could have its attack buffed in exchange, I suppose. Seems like a good card. Definitely something you could play in a Cthulhu deck because it works well in almost any deck to deal 2 damage on turn 3 and play a creature. It's just a lot of stuff going on for a low mana cost. We see our first common 10 mana card, the Faceless Behemoth. And yet they've made this just significantly worse than any other 10 mana card. Like, I kind of wish that rarity didn't determine if a card was going to be good or not. For example, N'Zoth, is it? Maybe I got the names wrong now. Yashara, no, it's Yashara, is 10/10, and it draws a card from your deck and puts it on the board each turn. Which, this could have been that. Like, that was a common card effect. This is just worse than that, so clearly not the greatest card. You'd pick it in Arena, I guess, but 10 mana is really hard to play in Arena, so I'm not sure when you're actually going to want to use that. Then we see first common 8 mana card, I guess. No, Force Tank Max was also 6/10. This is a little better, actually, than this one. There's nothing really with 10 health right now at 8 mana, so it's not great, but it is pretty hard to remove. You could use this for something. 7 mana, 5/5 with Wind Fury. This is awful. This is so awful. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. Wind Fury is in no way worth that stat distribution, and Wind Fury is also better on smaller creatures. The biggest advantage to Wind Fury is you can buff the creature and then the attack is doubled. So having a bigger creature with Wind Fury, it doesn't really matter. If you give it a buff, it's still doubled. Pretty bad, and you won't play that card. 7 mana, 6/8 Bog Creeper. It's got taunt, it's a 6/8. Yeah, sure, you can play this. It's a good taunt card. A lot of classes don't have access to a big taunt card. If you compare it to Ancient of War, it doesn't seem that good, but it's actually, slightly comparable because it has 1 more attack, even though it has 2 less health. And just for classes that don't have as many taunt cards, this is very useful. Also a great arena card, obviously, since it's common. 6 mana 4/4 Nerubian Prophet. At the start of your turn, reduce this card's cost by 1. So if you have it in your opening hand, it's going to cost 3 by the time you're on turn 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes. And so if you have this in your opening hand, it's pretty good, but you wouldn't really want to keep a 3 mana card in your opening hand a lot of the time. If you draw this later in the game, it's terrible. It's really, really bad. The biggest advantage to this card is if you have it early, but the rest of your curve is good enough that you don't have to play it, and on some turn it gets down to 1 or 0 mana. I don't think you're going to play this very often. It's a little inconsistent, and in top decking it feels really bad. 5 mana Psychotron, Taunt Divine Shield 3/4. Whoa, that's a strong creature. It's definitely, Taunt Divine Shield is one of the most frustrating mechanics in the game. It's a bigger form of the Annoyatron. 3/4 stat's not that great. If it was 3/5 though, it would just straight up be way too powerful. So I think you could play this card. You could definitely play it. It's also a mech, and we lost a lot of mechs, so there's probably some use with the mech synergy as well. 4 mana Aberrant Berserker, 2/5 Enrage plus 2 attack. Okay, same problem as all the other 2/5s for 4 mana. Things with 2 attack just don't trade very well. A lot of this time, this will not actually get an Enrage. It's just going to get one shot by something, and then you play it a crappy Yeti. So, why would you ever play this, in fact? What advantage could this possibly have over a Yeti, which is just a 4/5 for 4 mana? Because even when this is enraged, it's just a 4/5. But it would have to have taken damage first. There must be some like enrage synergy, or I guess if you're offered this in arena and that's your best pick. Seems pretty bad for the most part. 3 mana 1/5. You're not going to play this. There are 1/4s for 2 mana, but nobody plays them because 1 damage doesn't trade well enough. Works with Hobgoblin, I guess. It does work with Hobgoblin. It's very strong after that. 3 mana Squirming Tentacle, 2/4 with Taunt. It's a Fierce Monkey with 1 less attack, but it's a neutral card. I don't think you're going to play this very often. It has a chance, but it's not the greatest card. 2 mana Battlecry Summon a 1/1 Ooze with Taunt. Balefin Tidehunter. So this is an improvement on the old Murloc Tidehunter, which would summon 2 Murlocs, and instead this one gives you Ooze with Taunt. So you only get 1 Murloc, but you get a Taunt. It's definitely better than the 2 Murlocs, like infinitely better. The Taunt is very valuable in the early game. And you could play this even in non-Murloc decks, because the Taunt is that good in the early game. 2 mana 3/1 Twisted Worgen with Stealth. Well, if Knife Juggler stopped being a thing, I think this could, definitely do some work. 3 damage is going to trade well on a lot of 3 mana creatures, especially if you use, say, a hero power to help it trade up. You could buff it with things. A Paladin, oh man. I'm thinking of the Paladin deck with all the Divine Shields now. And you put this on the board, they can't remove it. You give it Divine Shield trade, maybe you can give it Divine Shield again after that. Yeah, this is a cool card. I definitely think you could play this. 2 mana 4/1 Duskboar. Why would you play this card? This is just bad. This is just bad. I mean, it dies to 1 damage. It does 4 damage. Has no effect on it. It's a beast. I guess you would play this because you got it as a random beast. That's why you would play it. Hunters get a lot of random beasts, so that's when you're going to see this card. 2 mana 1/4 Twilight Geomancer. Taunt. Battlecry, give your Cthulhu Taunt. 2 mana 1/4 with Taunt is not that bad. It would be bad in the current meta that we have pre-standard release, but once a lot of the early game creatures are toned down a bit, as we're going to see with the removal of Nax and GVG cards, I think a 1/4 is actually not so terrible for 2 mana, and then the Taunt gives it extra value. So yeah, you can play this card. Also works really well with Hobgoblin. Giving your Cthulhu Taunt is not very useful, though. I don't think that's going to be very relevant. 1 mana Zealous Initiate. Death Rattle, give a friendly minion +1/+1. Okay, it's a Death Rattle card. And right away, Death Rattle cards are pretty valuable right now. We saw a lot of Death Rattle synergy, which is strong. And then, yeah, its stat weight is good. It's 1 mana, so if you play it on turn 1, it buffs your next guy. It might make your next guy unremovable. Yeah, this is really strong, actually. If you play this on turn 1 and your opponent doesn't remove it, and you play a 2/3, and then you trade with this, this could have killed the 2/1 from your opponent, and it turns your 2/3 into a 3/4. And there are a lot of 2/3s that are actually like required to be removed on 2 mana, or they're going to start scaling up. Or even, yeah, this is a good card. This is a very good card. You could definitely play this in a number of decks. Aggro and control decks will both be able to use it. That concludes our look at the massive release of cards. Only the tokens remain, which we've all seen those. Rogue Poisons. Beautiful. A lot of really cool cards. Looking forward to playing them. Definitely, if I was to give a summary of all the cards that I've seen so far, I would say that Shaman is looking amazing. The Shaman cards that we've seen this expansion seem leagues ahead of the other cards for different classes, and Shaman was already in a comfortable place. The changes that have happened have made the Shaman removal feel more valuable in a lot of ways. Pretty cool. I look forward to it. One of the nice things is, if Shaman is the most popular deck, it's a board control deck. It's something that's trying to develop a lot of creatures, so it means you can counterplay it. It's not a burst damage type of deck, though they have a fair share of burst as well. Hope you guys enjoyed that card review, and I will see you next time.